The morning the real estate photographer appeared outside my front gate, I finally understood what my daughter-in-law had been doing for months. She wasn't making suggestions anymore. She was making plans for my house, plans for my future, plans for money that didn't belong to her. Welcome back to Mother's Calm Revenge, where quiet mothers discover their strength and people who mistake kindness for weakness eventually learn that every decision has consequences. Today's story is about a mother who spent decades building a home with her husband, only to discover that her son and daughter-in-law had already decided how they would use it. They thought she would eventually surrender. They were wrong. My name is Evelyn Whitmore. My son's name is Nathan, and his wife's name is Claudia. For months, Claudia had been studying my home like an architect preparing a renovation. It started with a measuring tape. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into my living room and found Claudia kneeling beside the hardwood floor. She stretched a bright yellow tape measure from one wall to another. My walnut cabinet had been pushed several inches away from the wall. That cabinet belonged to my late husband, Arthur. He had built it with his own hands shortly after we moved into this house. The scrape of the wood against the floor made something inside me tighten. "What are you doing?" I asked. Claudia looked up with a cheerful smile. "Just checking the dimensions." "For what?" She stood and brushed her hands together. "I was thinking about opening this room up. If this wall came down, the whole first floor would feel enormous." "The wall stays." Her smile remained, but something changed behind her eyes. "Of course," she said. "I'm only thinking about possibilities." Nathan stood near the hallway with his phone in one hand and an expensive coffee in the other. He suddenly became very interested in his screen. I had spent more than 30 years working as a land surveyor. I knew property lines, foundations, drainage, zoning, and construction. More importantly, I knew my own house. Arthur and I had bought this land when it was nothing but wild grass. We saved for years, poured every dollar we could into the construction, and watched this home slowly rise around us. This wasn't simply a property, it was our life. Claudia wasn't finished. "Nathan thinks you spend too much time maintaining the garden," she said. I looked at my son. "You said that?" Nathan shrugged. "Mom, it is a lot of work." "I enjoy it." Claudia stepped closer. "A smaller place near the medical district would be much easier for you." I understood immediately. They weren't worried about my garden. They were worried about the amount of money sitting beneath my feet. 3 weeks later, Claudia arrived with a leather folder filled with market reports, renovation estimates, and property information. She placed everything across my kitchen counter. "The market is changing," she explained. "We should start thinking strategically." Nathan sat at the table. "The timing could work." I continued chopping vegetables. "What timing?" Claudia opened a report. "The equity in this house could help everyone." I stopped cutting. There it was, not my home, not your house. The equity. She spoke about my life as though it were a bank account waiting to be emptied. I slowly placed the knife on the counter. "Anything else?" Nathan cleared his throat. "The roof will need attention eventually." "The roof was replaced 4 years ago." He froze. "You signed the warranty paperwork because my wrist was injured, remember?" "Right! I forgot." Claudia quickly interrupted. "The roof isn't the point." "I know," I said quietly. "The point is that you have hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up here." I looked at both of them. Then I removed my gardening gloves from the windowsill. "I have some work to do outside." Claudia stared at me. "Aren't you going to answer?" I picked up my gloves. I already did. That evening, I realized something important. They weren't waiting for me to offer help. They were waiting for me to become inconvenient. And I had just decided that I wouldn't make it easy for them anymore. After that conversation, I quietly began changing the way I lived. For years, Nathan had treated my house like an extension of his own. Every Tuesday, he would arrive with 2 overflowing laundry baskets and a hungry smile. I cooked his favourite meals, washed his clothes, and packed leftovers for him to take home. After Claudia entered his life, the requests multiplied. Special groceries, prepared meals, laundry, small errands. Somehow, without ever officially asking, I had become responsible for making their lives easier. So, I stopped. The following Tuesday, Nathan arrived with 2 laundry baskets. The house was quiet. The kitchen was dark. Beside his old spare key, I had left a short note. Nathan, my schedule has changed. The downtown laundromat has excellent machines. When I returned later that evening, he was standing on my porch. You didn't answer your phone. It was on silent. Claudia needs these clothes tomorrow. I looked at my 32-year-old son. Then Claudia should wash them. His expression hardened. You've changed, Mom. Yes, I held his gaze, and I'm beginning to understand why. He didn't ask what I meant, neither did I explain. By the middle of August, Claudia had stopped pretending that her interest in my home was casual. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was outside trimming the hydrangeas along the front walkway when a silver SUV stopped near the curb. A woman stepped out wearing a cream-coloured blazer. She carried a professional camera, clipboard, and leather case. Mrs. Whitmore? I straightened. Yes? She smiled politely. My name is Lauren Bennett. I'm with a local real estate agency. My hand slowly lowered from the pruning shears. Why are you here? She glanced at her clipboard. Claudia asked me to take some preliminary photographs for a private property listing. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then I placed the pruning shears on the porch railing. Claudia asked you to photograph my house? Lauren nodded. She said the property was being prepared for a family transfer. I stared at her. Claudia is married to my son. Yes? She doesn't own this property. Lauren's smile disappeared. Mrs. Whitmore, I was under the impression you were given the wrong impression. I pointed toward the driveway. She doesn't have permission to list this house. She doesn't have permission to photograph it. She doesn't have permission to show it to anyone. Lauren immediately lowered her clipboard. I apologize. You don't need to apologize. You need to understand that you were brought here without my authorization. She nodded quickly. I'll contact Claudia. Please do. The SUV disappeared down the street. My phone rang before I even reached the front door. Claudia, I answered. What did you say to the agent? She demanded. Only the truth. You embarrassed me. You sent someone to photograph my home without asking me. We paid for a consultation. Then you wasted your money. Her voice sharpened. Nathan and I are trying to build a future. I know. You know how difficult things are right now. I know exactly how difficult life becomes when people expect someone else to finance the future they want. There was silence. Then she said, We're family. I looked toward the garden Arthur and I had planted together. Family does not mean ownership. I ended the call. That evening, I went into the basement. Arthur's workshop was still there. His old tools hung above the wooden bench exactly where he had left them. I opened the metal filing cabinet. Inside were the original deed, tax records, insurance papers, and documents showing that the mortgage had been paid in full. I carried everything upstairs. Then I sat alone at the kitchen table. Nathan was my only child, and that was exactly what had made me vulnerable. He believed the house would eventually be his. Claudia believed it too. They had already built their future around an inheritance they hadn't received. The next morning, I drove downtown to meet Julian Mercer, an attorney I had known for years. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything. When I finished, he folded his hands on the desk. So, he said, you want to make your intentions legally clear. I want there to be no room for pressure, assumptions, or manipulation. He reviewed the documents. This can be done. How soon? If you're certain, we can begin immediately. I looked down at Arthur's name on the old deed. The house represented nearly 3 decades of our lives. I thought about the measuring tape, the market reports, the laundry baskets, the real estate photographer. Then I looked at Julian. I've never been more certain. He nodded. Then let's begin. When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. I wasn't planning revenge. I was protecting my future. And Nathan and Claudia had no idea that while they were planning what to do with my house, I had already started deciding what would happen to it. Over the next several weeks, I changed my routine completely. I joined a morning walking group. I enrolled in a pottery class. I hired a carpenter to transform the smallest upstairs bedroom into a sewing studio. For the first time in years, I began filling my days with things I actually wanted to do. Nathan noticed. His calls became more frequent, his questions became more careful, and every conversation somehow returned to the same subject: the house. One Sunday evening he called. "Mum, Claudia's parents are coming next month." "That's nice. They don't really have enough space at our apartment." I already knew what was coming. "Could they stay in your guest room for a few days?" "No." There was silence. "Mum, a hotel is expensive." "Then they should budget for one." His voice tightened. "Why are you making everything difficult lately?" "I'm not making anything difficult." I looked around my peaceful living room. "I'm simply no longer making everything easy for everyone else." He didn't answer. Then he said something that told me exactly where the conversation had come from. "Claudia thinks you hate her." I almost laughed. "No, Nathan. Claudia thinks I hate her because I refuse to give her what she wants." The call ended shortly afterward. By early October, I knew they were running out of patience. Then Nathan sent me a message. "Can we come over Sunday? We need to clear the air." I stared at the screen. After several minutes, I replied, 2:00. At exactly 2, their car entered my driveway. Claudia stepped out first. She wore a dark blazer and carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm. Nathan followed. He looked uncomfortable. The portfolio told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a family conversation. It was a negotiation. And apparently, I was the only person who hadn't been given the agenda. I led them into the living room. Claudia sat on the sofa. Nathan sat beside her. I took Arthur's old armchair. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, Claudia placed the portfolio on the coffee table. "Mum," she began, carefully, "we've been trying to approach this situation reasonably." "Go on." She opened the portfolio. "We need to make some important decisions about the future." "Our future?" I asked. She looked directly at me. "All of our futures." She removed several documents and slid them across the table. I picked up the first page. My property address was printed across the top. My name appeared several times. Below it was a proposed financial agreement involving home equity, refinancing, and shared ownership. I looked at Claudia. "You had these prepared?" Nathan shifted in his seat. "We were just exploring options." "Options involving my property?" Claudia leaned forward. "Adding Nathan to the title would simplify everything." "In what way?" "It would make the future easier." There it was again, the future, always their future. Nathan finally spoke. "Mum, housing prices are extremely high where I may be relocating. If we could access some of the equity here, we'd have enough for a substantial down payment." I placed the papers back on the table. "So, your plan is for me to borrow against the house I own, so you can purchase a house you can't currently afford." "We would make the payments," Claudia said. "With what guarantee?" She frowned. "We're family." I shook my head. "Family is not a financial guarantee." Her expression hardened. You have 4 bedrooms here. So, you're living alone in a large house while your son is struggling. Nathan has a job. He has expenses. So do I. That's different. I smiled. Why? She opened her mouth, but no answer came. I continued. You've decided that my expenses are unnecessary while yours are investments. Her face reddened. We're trying to create something for ourselves. Then create it. Nathan looked at me. Mum, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. No, you don't. If we don't buy soon, we'll lose our opportunity. Then find a home within your budget. Claudia suddenly slapped her hand against the sofa cushion. You're being incredibly selfish. Nathan glanced at her. Claudia. But she continued. Nathan is your only child. I remained silent. This house will eventually be his anyway. The room became completely still. I slowly stood. You've spent months talking about my death as though it were a date on a calendar. Her eyes widened. That's not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. Nathan lowered his head. Mum, nobody wants you to die. Then stop planning my life around it. Claudia grabbed the documents again. This is sensible. You stay here. Nothing changes for you. We simply become co-owners, refinance the property, and use part of the equity for our down payment. I stared at her. They still believed they were negotiating. They didn't know the decision had already been made. I walked toward the side of Arthur's armchair. Inside the small storage pocket was a large sealed envelope. I removed it. Nathan's eyes followed my hand. Claudia stopped talking. I placed the envelope on the coffee table. What is that? Nathan asked. Something I should have shown you earlier. Claudia reached toward it. I nodded. She opened the envelope. Inside were certified legal documents. She pulled out the first page. Her eyes moved across the heading. Then she stopped. The confidence disappeared from her face. Nathan leaned closer. What is it? Claudia didn't answer. She turned to the next page. Her fingers began to tremble. Finally, she whispered 4 words. What did you do? I looked directly at her, and for the first time that afternoon, I smiled. Claudia stared at the documents, as though the words might change if she looked at them long enough. What did you do? She asked again. This time, her voice was barely audible. Nathan reached for the papers. Mum, what is this? Read it. He took the first page. His eyes moved quickly across the document. Then his expression changed. Confusion, disbelief, fear. He looked at me. You transferred the property? Yes. To who? Not to a person. Claudia snatched the papers from his hands. She flipped through them until she found the section describing the new ownership arrangement. Her face became pale. You put the house into a protected trust? I did. Neither of them spoke. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the rustling of paper. Nathan finally looked up. But why? I leaned back in Arthur's old chair. Because I finally understood what was happening. Claudia's eyes narrowed. And what exactly do you think was happening? You were turning my home into your financial resource. She immediately shook her head. We were trying to help Nathan build a future. No. I looked at both of them. You were trying to build your future with something Arthur and I spent our entire lives working for. Nathan shook his head. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? He didn't answer, so I continued. For months, you discussed downsizing me. I pointed toward Claudia. You talked about moving me somewhere smaller. Then I looked at Nathan. You discussed refinancing my home and adding yourselves to my title. I paused. You even sent a real estate photographer here without permission. Claudia crossed her arms. That was a misunderstanding. No. My voice remained calm. A misunderstanding is arriving at the wrong appointment. Sending someone to photograph another person's home for a potential listing is planning without permission. Her face reddened. I pointed toward the papers. And now, there is no confusion. Nathan stared at the documents. What does this mean? It means the property cannot be sold. His head lifted. What? It cannot be refinanced. I continued calmly. It cannot be used as collateral for a loan. No one can borrow against it. Claudia stepped forward. But you still own it, right? Not in the way you mean. Her breathing changed. What happens when you die? There it was, the question she had been waiting months to ask. I looked directly into her eyes. When I die, this house will not become yours. Nathan froze. You changed my inheritance? I removed the house from your inheritance. He sat completely still. For the first time, I saw genuine shock on his face. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious. I explained the arrangement. I retained the legal right to live in the home for the rest of my life. I could maintain it, enjoy it, and make ordinary decisions about my living space. But after my lifetime, the property would serve a different purpose. It would become part of a community program dedicated to environmental education and local gardening. Arthur's name would remain connected to it. Children would learn about plants, soil, conservation, and responsible land use. The house wouldn't disappear. It would become something useful. Claudia stared at me. You gave it away? No. I looked at her calmly. I gave it a future. She let out a bitter laugh. A future? Then her voice rose. You destroyed our future. Her words no longer hurt, not the way they would have months earlier. Your future was never supposed to depend on my property. She grabbed her handbag. Do you realize what you've done to Nathan? I turned toward my son. Do you realize what you tried to do to me? Nathan looked away. That hurt, more than Claudia's anger. She had never been my responsibility. Nathan was my son. I had raised him. I had fed him. I had protected him. I had believed that somewhere beneath his silence, he would remember that I was a person before I was an inheritance. Instead, he had sat beside his wife while she presented financial documents designed to turn my home into their source of financing. Mum, he said quietly. I waited. You could have talked to me. I did. His eyes met mine. Every time you came here with another suggestion, I answered you. Every time Claudia talked about selling, refinancing, or moving me somewhere smaller, I answered her. I took a slow breath. You simply didn't like my answers. His head lowered. Claudia moved toward the door. This is unbelievable. No, I said. She stopped. This is what unbelievable looks like. I pointed toward the paperwork. 2 adults arriving at a woman's home with financial documents already prepared, expecting her to surrender control because they've decided her property will eventually belong to them. Claudia tightened her grip on her handbag. You'll regret this. Maybe. I opened the front door. But at least the regret will belong to me. She stepped outside. Nathan remained behind. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at the documents on the coffee table. Everything is really gone. I shook my head. No, Nathan. He looked up. Not everything. I watched him carefully. The house is gone from your inheritance. I paused. But you still have a mother. His expression changed. And for the first time that day, I wondered whether he understood what he had nearly lost. Nathan remained standing near the doorway, staring at me as though he was trying to understand how the woman who had always said yes had finally learned to say no. Outside, Claudia was waiting beside the car. Through the window, I could see her pacing while talking angrily on her phone. Nathan looked back at the documents. So that's it? What do you mean? The house, my inheritance, everything. I shook my head. You keep saying something was taken from you. His face tightened. You said the house won't be mine. Correct. He stared at me. I don't understand. The difference is simple, Nathan. You never owned it in the first place. He looked away. I knew the truth hurt, but some truths hurt because they arrive after years of comfortable assumptions. You had already spent the value of this house in your mind, I said. No, I hadn't. Then why did you and Claudia meet with lenders? He said nothing. Why was my name placed on paperwork I had never seen? Silence. Why did Claudia send a real estate photographer to my home? Nathan lowered his head. He had no answer. I walked toward Arthur's old chair and rested my hand against its wooden frame. When your father and I bought this property, nobody gave us a shortcut. Nathan remained quiet. We worked extra hours. We postponed vacations. We repaired things ourselves when we couldn't afford as contractors. I looked toward Arthur's photograph hanging in the hallway. We built this life ourselves. Nathan's voice was barely audible. That's not fair. I turned toward him. Then tell me what is fair. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Outside, Claudia suddenly slammed the car door. The sound echoed through the house. Nathan eventually walked back into the living room and sat down. For the first time that afternoon, he didn't look angry. He looked lost. I didn't know you were going to do this. I know. You could have told me. Could you have listened? He stared at the floor. His silence answered for him. I sat across from him. Nathan, I didn't make this decision because I stopped loving you. He looked up. I made it because loving you doesn't require me to surrender control of my life. His expression softened. For a moment, I thought he finally understood. Then he asked the question that reminded me how much work remained. Is there any way to change it? No. Not even if I apologize. An apology doesn't undo a legal decision. What if Claudia apologizes? I almost smiled. That would certainly be a first. He rubbed his hands over his face. You don't understand the pressure we're under. I understand more than you think. I had been young once. I knew what it felt like to want a larger home, a better car, more security, and more freedom. But wanting something never transformed another person's belongings into your solution. Nathan, I said quietly, you and Claudia are allowed to want a better life. He looked at me. But you are not allowed to build that life by treating mine as an obstacle. His shoulders dropped. Outside, Claudia honked the horn. Once. Then again. Nathan closed his eyes. I should go. Yes. He stood slowly. At the door, he stopped. Are you really naming the program after Dad? Yes. He looked toward Arthur's photograph. He would have liked that. I think so too. Nathan nodded. Then he stepped outside. I watched him walk toward the passenger side of the car. Claudia immediately leaned across the center console, speaking rapidly. Nathan didn't respond. He simply closed the door. The car backed out of the driveway and disappeared. I stood alone on the porch. The evening air was cool. A few leaves had fallen beneath the maple tree. My garden needed watering. Everything looked exactly the same. And yet, somehow everything felt different. I locked the front door. Then I gathered the legal papers from the coffee table and returned them to their drawer. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to check my phone. I didn't wonder when Nathan would call. I didn't prepare myself for another conversation about selling, refinancing, downsizing, or making sacrifices for someone else's future. I went into the kitchen. I filled the kettle. Then I opened the cabinet and reached for Arthur's favourite tea. That night, I ate dinner alone. Surprisingly, I didn't feel lonely. I felt peaceful, because I had finally learned something that had taken me far too long to understand. Peace sometimes begins the moment you stop negotiating with people who only value you for what they believe they can receive from you. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for another demand. No messages from Claudia, no missed calls from Nathan, no real estate agents, no lenders, just birds singing outside my bedroom window. I made coffee and walked into the garden. The morning light touched the flowers Arthur and I had planted together. Some roses were fading. The herbs were thriving. I knelt down and pulled weeds. It was ordinary work, and that was exactly what I needed. Later that week, Julian called. Everything has been officially recorded. I closed my eyes. And there is no confusion? None. Your trust documents are complete, and your lifetime residential rights are clearly established. I thanked him. After hanging up, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt relieved. There is a difference. Victory means someone else lost. Relief means you finally stopped losing yourself. A few days later, Nathan called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Hi, Mum. Hi. There was a long pause. How are you? I'm fine. Good. Another silence followed. Then he finally said, Claudia is still angry. I gave a faint smile. That doesn't surprise me. She's saying you humiliated us. I didn't invite you there to humiliate anyone. I know. His voice sounded tired. I've been thinking about what you said. I waited. I should have stopped her earlier. Those words mattered more than Nathan probably realized. I looked out the kitchen window. Yes, I said quietly. You should have. I'm sorry, Mum. This time, I believed him. Not because the apology fixed everything. It didn't, but because it sounded different from his earlier excuses. I don't expect you to change everything overnight, I told him. But if you want a relationship with me, you need to understand something. What? You are my son. He remained silent. You are not my financial partner. He gave a quiet laugh. I understand. And if you come here, come because you want to see your mother. I do. Then you're welcome. There was another pause. I miss you, Mum. I closed my eyes. I miss you too. We talked for almost 20 minutes. Not about the house, not about money, not about inheritance. We talked about his job, my garden, and the pottery class I had recently joined. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was real. And for that moment, it was enough. The following Saturday, Nathan came to my house alone. He stood on the porch holding a small paper bag. I brought something. Inside was a framed photograph of Arthur. I had never seen the picture before. Arthur was standing beside our unfinished house, covered in sawdust, smiling directly at the camera. My throat tightened. Where did you find this? Grandpa's old storage box. I touched the frame carefully. Thank you. Nathan looked toward the garden. Can I help with anything? I smiled. You can start by pulling weeds. He laughed. For the next hour we worked side by side. There were no dramatic speeches, no promises about money, no arguments, just a mother and her son working in a garden. And somehow, that meant more than any apology. Months passed, the community project began taking shape. The downstairs rooms were reorganized, the old garage became a workshop. The garden became part of the environmental education program. Children eventually came to learn about native plants, soil, gardening, and conservation. A small wooden sign was installed near the front gate. The Arthur Whitmore Community Garden and Learning House. I stood beside it the day it was unveiled. Nathan was there. Claudia wasn't. Perhaps someday she would understand. Perhaps she wouldn't. I no longer needed her understanding. That was another lesson I had learned. You cannot build your peace around another person's approval. You cannot measure your worth by what your family believes you should give them. And you cannot spend the rest of your life apologizing for protecting the life you worked decades to build. That evening, I returned home as the sun disappeared behind the trees. I unlocked the front door. The walnut cabinet was still exactly where Arthur had placed it. His old armchair remained beside the window. The kitchen still smelled faintly of fresh herbs. Nothing had been sold. Nothing had been surrendered. But the house had become more than a possession. It had become a promise. A promise that the life Arthur and I built together would continue helping people long after we were gone. I made tea and sat quietly in the living room. My phone remained silent, and for once I didn't mind. I looked around the room and smiled. Claudia had thought I was sitting on an asset. Nathan had thought he was waiting for an inheritance. They had both been wrong. I had never been sitting on a fortune. I had been sitting on a lifetime. And finally, I had decided to spend the rest of it exactly as I wanted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't waiting for Claudia to regret what she had done. And I wasn't waiting for Nathan to become the son I once imagined he would be. I had learnt something much more valuable. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't revenge. Sometimes saying no isn't cruelty. And sometimes the strongest thing a mother can do is stop confusing love with sacrifice. Arthur had built the walnut cabinet with his own hands. We had built our home with our own hands. And now, in a completely different way, I was building its future. Not for an inheritance. Not for a financial transaction. Not for people who believed they were entitled to it. For something larger than all of that. For children who would one day walk through the garden. For families who needed a place to learn. For neighbours who had never known Arthur but would know his name. And for myself. Because after decades of putting everyone else first, I had finally understood that my life was not an asset waiting to be divided. It was mine. My home was mine. My future was mine. And my peace was mine. That was the lesson Claudia never expected me to learn, and the lesson Nathan would never forget.